Welcome to Earthbeat on the Real News Network. I'm Daphne Weisham. We're continuing our conversation with Bob Alvarez. Bob is a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, where I'm a fellow. And Bob, we're discussing this issue of nuclear power. We're also obviously very concerned about the situation in Fukushima, Japan. One of the issues that's difficult to talk about, but I think everybody wants to know more about, is what is the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario has been spelled out in several studies over the years, and it's fairly well known in the circles of the nuclear industry, which is the worst case scenario involves catastrophic, and in this case catastrophic releases from multiple sources of radioactivity that could prove lethal, life-threatening to a lot of people, that could create enormous amounts of land contamination, rendering large areas uninhabitable, and then a radioactive aftermath that could be go on for centuries.
So the situation in Tokyo is not too promising. We're hearing that drinking water is contaminated with radioactive iodine. Can you talk about what that means for children and for infants?
Well, my understanding is tap water is now been contaminated at levels that are not considered safe for children and infants. Children and infants, especially infants, are at least 15 times more sensitive to the hazards of radiation than an adult male, for example. So you have to be very careful. The Japanese are now going to have to resort to other water supplies than their tap water.
For how long?
Well, these are questions that we don't have answers to right now.
Some are speaking out, mostly online. Crying is useless, one worker blogged. Another writes, "We will take our turn to protect you all." There's a sense of sacrifice running through many of the postings, as well as the understanding it may be the ultimate sacrifice. One worker's mother told an interviewer they have committed themselves to die if necessary to save the nation. And they have accepted they will all probably die from radiation sickness in the short term or cancer in the long term. Pretty plain talk, and it stands in stark contrast to the kind of talk we continue to hear from TEPCO. Keep it honest tonight. Despite pledges to be transparent and keep people informed, we continue to hear contradictory statements and statements that lack specifics. Most recently, the question of radioactive water at the plant and the nearby ocean. In TEPCO's briefing late last night, an official said levels of radioactive iodine from a pipe near the #1 reactor had reached 10,000 times the standard limit. Then a short time later, the utility said, "No, that's wrong, and we'll get you more information shortly." But they haven't gotten us more information. A government minister later tried to clear up the confusion, saying more testing would be done. CNN's Kyung La has been on the story for weeks, trying to cut through the fog, keeping them honest. She joins us now, along with former nuclear plant operator and safety expert Mike Friedlander, also joining us, Tom Friedlander. Kyung, is this an attempt at message control backfiring on TEPCO? Are people becoming increasingly upset with this company?
Upset might be an understatement. If you go onto the blogs and websites about TEPCO, Anderson, especially in Japanese, what you start to see is a general public outrage. And the reason we turn to the web is because there's an anonymity there. Culturally, a lot of Japanese won't publicly say how they feel, but on the web, it's a totally different game. There are websites where you can find the addresses, the home addresses of the TEPCO executives, and one of those web threads says, "Don't forgive TEPCO, send the executives to jail." There are other websites where you can see the salaries of the TEPCO employees, the management that is. And so all of this really does point to the rage that's out there in the Japanese public. They do not trust TEPCO. And if you step into one of these shelters where some of the Fukushima evacuees are, the people who live right around the plant, we keep hearing the same story, that people have been told not to express anything publicly. So there is a growing resentment both among the evacuees and also the general public, Anderson.
Michael.
The disaster in Japan and its nuclear crisis continued this past week, now slated to be the worst nuclear disaster in mankind's history. Max Kaiser had his own unique input into the matter.
All right, let's talk about this spent fuel for a second, because it sounds like what people, so-called terrorists or terrorists, like to source when they create their dirty bombs. And here you have an irresponsible company in Japan that's in effect created a dirty bomb and has attacked its own citizens with their irresponsible behavior. So politically speaking, there's 2 points here. One is, isn't this the same as a dirty bomb? And number two, what do you make of these reports coming out of the U.S. media that are trying to spin the radiation leak as having, to some degree, a health benefit? I'm talking about, for example, Fox News is running stories saying that there is some health benefits to nuclear radiation. Can you comment on that?
Well, I wouldn't believe anything that I saw on Fox News at all, quite frankly. No, I think it's ridiculous to suggest that there are health benefits from this. It's a matter of spin, and I think that is the irresponsible part. The Japanese company that runs Fukushima arguably has been no more irresponsible than virtually any other nuclear company. And yes, they have occasionally covered up safety records. They're by no means the only ones that have done that. Yes, they store spent fuel in pools with no containment. So does everybody else. So I don't think the company has been unusually irresponsible. Now, from your question about a dirty bomb, so what a dirty bomb would be radioactive material, not enough of it to generate a nuclear explosion, but to have a conventional explosion that spreads radioactive contamination around. You could get something like that in Fukushima if you have a meltdown, which we may or may not actually see. We've had partial meltdowns. I don't think at this point we can say we had a full meltdown. If we did, and the fuel in the reactor or one of the spent fuel pools melted through the floor of either the pool or the containment, melted through the reactor pressure vessel, melted through the concrete containment, it could melt down into the groundwater. You could get a steam explosion. And then, yes, that would spread radioactive contamination around.